Battle of Stalingrad has lasted 53 days. By the city on the Volga River, 240,000 German soldiers are caught in a trap. Their powers are exhausted and rescue is a vain hope. On the 8th of January 1943, the Red Army offers the Germans the opportunity to make an honorable surrender. But Hitler forbids them to negotiate, and the Russian offer is rejected.
The way I saw it, it was just like a doctor coming to see a patient on his deathbed. And then going off without giving the sick man the slightest hope. In a nutshell, leaving him to face death. That's what it seemed like to me.
2 days later, the 6th Army is expecting the final stroke.
On the 10th, we were in trouble from what I observed through my field glasses. I reported that infantry was advancing, hundreds and thousands of them. And tanks. I couldn't count them. There were at least 50, maybe even more. And my battery commander said, hey, didn't you count them?
Seven Soviet armies close in on the Stalingrad pocket, and 200,000 men overrun the German positions. The exhausted men can no longer fight back effectively.
The Russian armor broke through. I don't know how it happened in detail, but they literally overran our position. Then turned and came back again to crush the soldiers in the trenches. The tanks kept coming at us. We couldn't run very fast in the snow, so they simply ran over the ones who were there, who couldn't get away. There were soldiers lying there. One of them had lost his legs and was crying, "Shoot me! Go on, shoot me, shoot me!" And all we could do was to stand there, not moving, and just look at him. You couldn't take your own kit along with you, not if you were helping a wounded man to get away. It was simply not possible to carry both, so you had to leave your stuff behind.
The Red Army comes rolling in from the west, over the icy steppes. Thousands flee to the riverbank and the ruins of the fallen city. The Germans call their diminishing ground the Kessel, the cauldron.
What we have been through in the last few days is indescribable. There is still worse to come: misery, defeat, and death. The families of the majority who die here are never sent an exact notification. So if you never receive notification, then you should assume that I have either been wounded, taken prisoner, or died of hunger and cold. This is something of a farewell note. I don't know how many more days we can hold out.
In a bid to bring the horror to an end, an officer will be flown to Germany. The man chosen is the highly decorated Captain Winrich Beer.
And he told me, "Bear, we've decided to send you back to Hitler. We must do something to make him see what's going on here. And that will give us some room to negotiate." Paulus was raising the subject of a surrender, a capitulation, on the grounds that, as he said, it no longer made any sense to keep men there, starving and freezing in the cold.
Beer's mission is the last desperate approach to the High Command in an attempt to save lives. On the 14th of January, the officer arrives at the Führer's headquarters, the Wolf's Lair. He knows that Hitler will not be easily won over.
Then the door opened, and Herr Hitler entered and came up to me saying, "Heil, Herr Hauptmann." I stood to attention and replied, "Heil, mein Führer." Then he said, "Come with me." We went through a door into that famous room. And I plucked up my courage and said, "Mein Führer, I have orders from my commanding general to give you a report and to make a request of you. And now, may I carry out my orders?" Keitel was present, and I saw him nod. So then Hitler said, "Yes." And I must admit that he let me talk for the next 3 hours. He didn't interrupt or hinder me while I was giving my report or during the discussion.
But the decision has been made long before. Stalingrad must be held, no matter what the cost, for the sake of prestige and because it's named after Hitler's enemy Stalin. And that's why the pitiless tyrant will sacrifice a multitude.
Of course, I was angry. I was absolutely furious. Anyway, you could clearly see what people were saying, that Hitler had completely lost contact with reality.
Hitler condemns his soldiers to neglect, suffering, and hunger. 50 grams of bread, that's the daily ration. The temperature drops to minus 50 degrees Celsius. The cold is their greatest adversary. It claims more victims than enemy action.
We had nothing out there on the battlefield, cowering in our foxholes. It was all over, wasn't it? And it was awful, and we couldn't even light a fire at night in case we were spotted. And the everlasting cold was terribly depressing. Thank God, at the time I had decent winter clothing. Otherwise, I would have frozen to death on the first night. A rat can dig in. An animal burrows into the earth for shelter. But men cannot do that.
There's nothing more to say, apart from the fact that misery and weakness have combined to break us. The lice still find something to eat on men whose ribs are showing. Oh, if only our suffering would come to an end.
Many soldiers can no longer take the stress.
Men started going crazy. They would scream, hit themselves, or even foam at the mouth. Some of them would fall on the snow during attacks and do other strange things. In that place, madness could overcome you in the blink of an eye.
To be wounded is to suffer the most gruesome fate of all. In the cellars of the city lie 40,000 injured men. They receive no care at all.
The cellars were full of wounded men, severely wounded, feverish, dying. It stank like the plague in there. The odor was so clinging. It was, how shall I put it? It was like a charnel house where the bodies were still alive. There was a field surgical hospital set up in this factory building, which is where I witnessed the suffering. You can't describe it in detail. If you were to tell anything of what you had seen, but I don't like to do that, because it would be too upsetting. In a tiny back room in the cellars lay Cavalry Captain Sankt Paul. Shrapnel had destroyed his cranium, and the throbbing brain was exposed. Both his thighs were broken, and he was in a highly agitated state, shouting orders which disturbed the other 300 patients. They were more or less calmly waiting for their lives to end. Not one of the 300 had the slightest prospect of staying alive.
It's not only the Germans who are suffering. This January, in the ruins of the city, there are still thousands of civilians in a daily battle for survival.
So long as it wasn't too cold outside, the Russian women and the German troops would go out and cut meat off the dead horses. When the horses were all eaten, they moved on to eating dogs and cats after that. When there was nothing left to eat, then, please excuse me, they would cut slices off the buttocks of frozen corpses.
Cannibalism is common at Stalingrad. The Russians and the Germans are guilty of it, without exception. The Soviet prisoners in the Kessel also eat human flesh.
There was a camp where several thousand wounded, starving Russian prisoners were held. They either went mad or took to eating human flesh. The Germans couldn't look after the prisoners at all, for they were at death's door themselves.
For the German troops, the airfields at Pitomnik and Gumrak offer the last hope. On the 23rd of January, planes come in one by one to evacuate the wounded.
There were wounded men in great suffering on either side of the runway. There was a fellow with a Christ-like face. He was older than me and seemed nice. He told me, "Come on, I'll put my right arm around your shoulder." As he was holding me like that, I saw that he was badly wounded with a hole in his right lower chest. He had a woolen sock shoved in it. You can't imagine what it was like, for the sock kept falling out. And he would take it, this bloody lump, and push it back in. At last, we came to a field dressing station, and he collapsed.
Alongside the wounded are specialists who are also waiting to be evacuated. These specialized military staff are destined to escape.
The commanding general of my Panzer Corps was ordered out of the Kessel by the Führer on the 18th of January. On the 19th of January, I had to drive him in a half-track to the Gumrak airstrip, where he took his leave of us. I can remember it to this day. He never said a word. It was weird. It was traumatic, and I must say that I still cannot understand myself even now. I couldn't summon up the courage to say to the general, "Can't you take me with you?"
Conditions at the airfield are becoming more chaotic.
The Junkers 52 arrived. We should have been loaded into the aircraft by medics. But here's what happened instead. 4 high-ranking officers turned up, well-fed, in white fur coats, each of them carrying a machine pistol, saying that they were acting on the Führer's orders, and that we'd have to miss out. The doctor on the plane told them that it was reserved for wounded evacuees, but they kicked him off. I saw it with my own eyes. Yes, they were laughing at us. They got on that aircraft and forced the pilot to fly them out, without taking a single wounded soldier with them. That's the truth.
Only a few will escape the coming inferno.
Then suddenly, people started charging toward that plane over the snow. wounded, non-wounded, and what have you. The brutality was unsurpassed. You see, there was only one escape route left. No crew members were willing to leave the aircraft, and they wouldn't be taken off it if there was no other way out of the situation. The pilot would rev up and taxi the plane away. Indescribable scenes were being played out back there. It was completely chaotic. They were pushing the wounded in, pushing more and more of them in. There were plenty of them lying about already. And to make it worse, the Russians were shelling the airfield. Pilot said, "I've got to get going." He taxied down the runway, but the aircraft wouldn't leave the ground. There were soldiers hanging on all over the plane, right and left, especially on the undercarriage, those who could manage to cling. There was nothing for it but to make the plane swerve from side to side until they were all shaken off. They had to start again, and that was the most terrible moment. I can never forget the noise the starter motors were making. Boom, 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 until the engines caught and ran smoothly so the plane could take off. That's when I passed out. Then the pilot took the aircraft up high, maybe as high as 2,000 meters. And then we broke through the cloud cover. And it was such a wonder for me to be out in the sunlight. Suddenly, it was all brightness. I began to feel that my life had been given back to me. You can hardly imagine what it was like. And I still cannot grasp the reality. Things were so different. After cold and hunger and misery, bullets and shells, and the screams of wounded men, suddenly, there you are in a nice warm bed, with food to eat. And when a nurse first came to feed me my soup from a tin bowl, I cried without any embarrassment. I was carried onto a train for the wounded, which was headed not for home, but for Poland. Hitler wanted to keep the wounded soldiers out of Germany. We were undernourished, you see, and that didn't look so good. So then, I ended up in a military hospital in Zakopane. I only came back to Germany some months later, to the eye clinic at Halle, where Professor Dr. Klause operated on me and removed shell splinters from my cheek. They were embedded in my cheek, but it was only after 30 months that I came home to Germany on leave.
In wintry Germany, the fate of the 6th Army is largely unknown. The propaganda machine makes the situation seem less serious than it actually is, and news reports refer only to heavy fighting along the Volga. By now, many people no longer place any trust in the official bulletins.
We had no idea that the Germans were surrounded. And in January, at the end of January, I did what could have got me into serious trouble. I tuned into the BBC from England. I heard do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do, the notes from Beethoven's Fifth. I heard them saying, "This is England, this is England. The 6th Army in Stalingrad has been left to its fate. It was terrible. I sank onto a chair and thought to myself, I can't understand it. You know, who can grasp a thing like that? It was so shattering.
I love you so much that I cannot forbid you to find another man, since you are much too young to spend the rest of your life alone. With all my heart, I hope that you'll be able to find another man to bring you luck and happiness, just as I tried to do. In my final moments, I am grateful as I think back to the day I first got to know you.
That farewell letter from Stalingrad will never reach the woman who was waiting for it.
Angst.
There was a fear, a general fear that everyone had, including me. We were all afraid that the Russians would take no prisoners, that the Russians would shoot all of us. I couldn't bring myself to commit suicide. I said to myself, I'm far too young for that sort of thing at 22. Yes, you have to say that it would have been a crime to kill yourself. And the lieutenant of the first section ordered us to save the last bullet for ourselves. Later, as a prisoner, I bumped into this gentleman, and if I hadn't been in such a weakened state, I would have most likely given him a clout.
In the final days of January, the Red Army cuts the Kessel into two small pockets. The German commanders continue to follow Hitler's orders and fight on.
I didn't see them as fascists, but I took a certain pleasure in their plight. Serves you right, I thought. That's how we felt at the time.
General Paulus and his staff take refuge in the basement of a department store. Although it makes little sense to fight on, only a few high-ranking officers are in favor of laying down their arms. One of these men struggles to get into the headquarters, Captain Gerhard Dengler.
First of all, I nearly passed out from the reek of cigar smoke, brandy, and cooked meat. Then I was angry, and the thought occurred to me that we were out there eating human flesh, while in headquarters they still had meat to grill. They can still get luxuries such as brandy, and they have nice food to eat. And I said, why shouldn't we capitulate? Paulus answered me. He said, you've got it easy, Captain. All you have to do is look for the enemy and the whites of their eyes. But here in the 6th Army headquarters, I've got to make highly strategic decisions. I didn't understand him at all. I simply took it as a cowardly excuse and began to lose my temper. Paulus noticed that I was angry and suddenly remarked, yes, Herr Captain. Now that the moment of truth is upon us, the initiative has passed over to the officers in the field. At first I swallowed it, but then I began to get angry again. I thought to myself, here are 20 generals sitting on their thumbs, all of them too scared to surrender. But they're telling me, a low-ranking captain, to take the initiative, implying that if I take the risk and surrender, then I'll have to face the consequences. And if Hitler has you shot later on for showing initiative, that's just tough luck. I was thinking, if you've got full powers to capitulate, then that's what you should do.
Only a few officers come to the same conclusion. The majority feel that they must cling to their duty and honor.
Honor is a bond, and anyone who betrays his honor is a traitor to the fatherland, who would be condemned to death in absentia. And that includes officers and generals. Yes, it was important to the officers. With Paulus, for example, his glory as a general and his respect in the eyes of the German people would have been destroyed if he had surrendered. But the ordinary soldier said, to hell with their honor.
It is the 30th of January, the 10th anniversary of the Nazi regime. In a broadcast speech, Hermann Goering describes defeat in terms of heroism.
And in the end, although this may sound harsh, it matters little whether soldiers fall and die in Stalingrad, in the North African desert, or icy Norway. If they achieve greatness by offering themselves as a sacrifice, it is so that their people may live.
The soldiers in Stalingrad are listening to their own funeral oration.
And that's when I lost my temper completely. And not just for myself. It was for all of us. According to what he said, all of us were dead, as if the last officer had been blown to smithereens with all his men. But there were still many thousands of us when he told that infamous lie to all our wives and children.
The 2nd of February, and the battle is over, as 100,000 men lay down their arms. Paulus is among them. Just before the end, Hitler promotes him to the rank of Field Marshal, an unmistakable hint that he should take his own life. But Paulus, who was once a warrior and a leader, is now a spineless weakling. No German field marshal has ever been taken alive by the enemy, until now. His defeated troops are held in the pocket for 2.5 months.
After the surrender, we had 2,500 Germans locked up in the cellars. They were full of lice, filthy, and wrapped in blankets. They looked just like scarecrows, and on their feet they wore jackboots, just like cartoon Germans.
The Soviets report that the 6th Army has been defeated, but according to a secret document produced by Russian military intelligence, more than 10,000 Germans are putting up a bitter resistance. They fear captivity and hide in the sewers of the ruined city.
On the 13th of February, we were all at a movie show. Well, in the open air, of course. As the company was going back to our quarters, some Germans opened fire on us. They'd been hiding for all that time in the ruins. Of course, they were shot. I'm not too sure about this, but I think 2 or 3 of them were wounded, and the rest killed. We also had casualties. A pity, for this was just 2 weeks after the surrender.
2,418 soldiers and officers were killed. 8,646 were taken prisoner, according to reports. In early March, the last German soldiers lay down their arms. Stalingrad is the Soviet Army's first big success. This victory on the Volga is a milestone, the turning point of the Second World War.
We all cried. We shouted hooray and fired in the air. We had a big fireworks display. At all possible opportunities, we blazed away with our revolvers and machine pistols. We all shouted hooray and kissed each other and shed tears of joy.
The German prisoners face an uncertain future. For these exhausted men, the march into captivity becomes a torture.
I was feeling just like a piece of wood. I could do nothing to motivate myself. I was just swept away. Yes, we marched on over the body parts of soldiers who had been crushed by the tanks. They were scattered over the trenches, frozen solid in the blood-stained snow. The picture is still vivid in my mind's eye. Still there. We marched over snow and ice, past the bodies, scattered right and left. Those who couldn't keep up and had been shot. And in the evening, I was so worn out that I just stayed there, sitting by the side of the road. I was hoping that our Red Army escorts would put me out of my misery with a bullet. 2 soldiers from my unit came along. They obviously liked me, for they grabbed me, one on the left and one on the right, got me marching again and caught up with the others. They explained to me how they were going to cope with captivity. They wanted to work and that they were determined to do whatever it took, under any circumstances, to get back home. And I realized I wanted that too.
Many men do not survive the march. At least 20,000 die along the way. But the Germans' great fear that they will be executed proves groundless.
And there in front of us stands a high-ranking officer, smoking a looted cigar, a big, lovely cigar, puffing it so that the smoke rings rise in the air. And then our little fellow from Berlin chirps up and says, "Hey, that looks good. How about a puff then?" And he sticks his hand out to the officer. But the officer just frowns like that, and suddenly grins and hands over the lit cigar. And that incident gave me hope that maybe we would actually be treated properly. It wasn't at all as if we'd surrendered to people full of hate who wanted to destroy us.
Nonetheless, the death rate is high. There are so many German prisoners that the Red Army is stretched to the limit of its resources.
We miscalculated badly. The Soviet command and the planning unit were completely mistaken. We thought that there were about 80,000 German prisoners in Stalingrad, but there were more than 3 times as many. The first mercy that was shown us was when the army command forced the soldiers to give half of their bread ration to the prisoners. That left them with hardly any supplies. The army's connections with Russia were broken. All the roads and railways had been bombed. They were also having great difficulty in looking after their own people.
Hunger tests the soldiers to the limit.
In that camp, they were cutting bodies up and selling the meat. Of course, we had no idea it was human flesh, but we ate it nonetheless. Normal morals were destroyed in Stalingrad. I saw Germans turn into cannibals. For me, the basis of life that I learned in my parents' home was the civilized, honorable world. But all that had broken down in Stalingrad. They just couldn't maintain it in the face of such an inhumane conflict.
It is now early March 1943, and in the temporary camps near Stalingrad, roughly 50,000 prisoners have perished. The death toll is unusually high in the wake of the 12-week starvation these malnourished men have endured in the besieged Kessel.
Even a well-nourished man would have died there. Typhus killed many, and diphtheria. They didn't have to be weak and starving. But those who were weak and starving had no resistance at all. Every day in the morning, they used to go around and see who had died and who was still alive. And then, They took the bodies away somehow or another, sometimes in a disrespectful manner. The fellows who did that job used to grab the dead by the feet and drag them behind. The head used to shake from side to side, as if they were saying, "Not this way."
Als hätten sie sagen wollen, nur das nicht.
It was almost a feeling of relief when somebody died and was taken away the next day, because it left more room. In front of the barracks, there were heaps of bodies which were dragged away by teams of workers. And one day, I couldn't take another night in the barracks. So many of them used to just sit there and soil themselves without any hesitation. It stank like the plague. And there it was vile. I simply couldn't take it any longer. I had to get out. But then, I couldn't get back in. There was an icy wind outside, and snow was falling. I went through the camp to another barracks, but they wouldn't let me in either. Then, right on the edge of the camp, I found yet another hut. It was very still inside, so I went in and settled down. I lay down between bundled figures. I was utterly exhausted. Then I noticed a hand and a head. This is where they stored the corpses. So there I lay among the dead.
Death rules the prisoner of war camps.
I went down with typhus myself, and it was a strange feeling every morning to have your neighbor checking you to see if you were still alive. And one thing I noticed was that dying of typhus is a relatively humane way to go. In the later stages, the sick men began to have fantasies. They wanted to go to the airfield, to the railway station. They wanted to collect their house keys so that they could go home.
The Soviet doctors didn't give up. They helped their enemy to the best of their ability.
During the epidemic, we had a Jewish doctor, a lady, who treated us with great humanity. She came from Leningrad. She lost an arm during the German bombardment, and all her family were killed. And yet, she looked after her German patients 100%. She did everything she could. She personally saved my life by sending me to a field hospital against my will. If she hadn't done that, I would have caught typhus.
The medical staff tried really hard. Our chief medical officer used to say, "We are dealing with human beings. At this moment, there are no fascists, only sick men."
Only 33,000 men survived the prison camp. They are taken away in goods trains to perform forced labor. Traveling in unheated wagons, they are only fed every third day. Nearly half of them die, on a journey which crosses the entire Soviet Union. 18,000 prisoners are sent to camps in the Ural Mountains, Siberia, and Kazakhstan, where they were put to work mining coal and uranium. Some of them are tried as war criminals and sentenced to 25 years hard labor. In these remote regions, temperatures of 60 degrees Celsius below zero are common.
Such great cold means that the wind chill factor came into play. It was always stormy weather in winter, and the temperature sank to 30 or 40 below zero. We were obviously in a deeply depressing situation, which led to a feeling of hopelessness. 25 years means forever, and we really believed that we would have to sit there forever, and that we would never see our homes again.
Many of these prisoners will not survive the harsh conditions and hard labor. Only 6,000 of them will eventually be sent home.
You must not die here. You must survive. You want to go home. You want to see your wife and children again. Your parents. Your sisters. That's what gave me an unbreakable will to stay alive.
Conditions in the camps improve as the Soviet authorities try to hold the inmates' death rate down.
In the end, we were fed very well. We began to improve. We got stronger and made good recovery. We also heard there was to be a camp library. It was full of books, all right. So we could educate ourselves in the library they gave us. Of course, there were political books too. Marx, Engels, Das Kapital, and all the writings of Stalin and Lenin too. We learned all their theories from the books.
At the same time, they're trying to enlist German soldiers in the struggle against Hitler. There is a national committee and a league of anti-Nazi officers who disseminate propaganda against the Third Reich. These men are looked on as traitors by their comrades in arms.
The whistle went off. It didn't last very long, but my own comrades turned against me. They even spat on me. In the barracks room, where we slept in 4 beds with metal frames, they shifted mine out into the middle of the room. I was sent to Coventry in splendid isolation. I was totally boycotted and cut off from human contact. And I must say that to lose the support of your comrades in prison is a severe punishment.
Those siding with the Soviets will be resented forever. By May 1945, most of the prisoners are aware that Germany has been defeated.
Late one evening, we were all still up, and it was announced that the war was over. And they started telling us, Skora budi domoi. That means, you're going home soon. Skora budi domoi. And we asked when this would be. We were told, when Russia has been rebuilt, then you can go home. It could take another 10 years.
Stalingrad is rebuilt by Germans. The city, now renamed Volgograd, has a modern population of 1 million. This city is forever linked with the horrors of war. Today, the scars inflicted by war have not faded. Buildings are still pockmarked with bullet holes. For the Germans, the city on the Volga River remains a symbol of unspeakable sadness. Only a few of them came home from Stalingrad.
On the 18th of September, we were at home when someone came to the house and knocked. So I went downstairs and said, "How can I help you? Who are you looking for?" "Yes," he said, "I'm looking for somebody." "Well, our name is Tomish," I said. "Yes, Tomish, that's us." Then he said, "I just wanted to let you know that your husband is alive." I couldn't take it in. I don't know what I asked him. I don't know what we said to each other. I never even asked his name or where he lived, who he was. I said, "Thank you so much. It can't be true. My husband is alive." I held my daughter in my arms and went racing round to tell the family. "Can you believe it? Can you believe it? Helmut is alive." It was indescribable.
The prisoners' families placed their hopes on Konrad Adenauer, the first German state chancellor. He goes to Moscow and appeals for the release of the captive soldiers, successfully. But even as the troop trains roll back to the fatherland, old scores are settled with so-called traitors.
In Frankfurt, there were quite a few murders. Bodies lying in the street the next morning.
Old comrades take their delayed revenge on those prisoners who had sided with the Russians. By 1955, the last prisoners of war are back from the Soviet Union, including those who survived the inferno of the Stalingrad pocket. Many families are hoping for news of their missing men, fathers, and sons.
I felt so powerless. I sympathized, but what was I supposed to do when people kept asking me, "Do you know this man? Do you know this man?" And if you're a sensitive type, that sort of thing can really get to you.
And then I saw while my mother was crying, other women could put their arms around their husbands, and the men could pick up their children and hold them. There was such joy and embraces, but we had to go away feeling empty. Stalingrad was a death sentence, for me as well as for him. I was dead too. I was dead. I was dead, and I had to go on living for the sake of the child. Our child needed me.
And then I came to the house, and I was overjoyed to be home. And all the people came out and greeted me and embraced me, and there were flowers everywhere, and the bells were ringing. And then the main thing was that I had spent 6 years in captivity, which turns you into another man entirely. And that's why I was afraid when I came home. Of course, there was that to begin with. But then, on the other hand, there was the longing and so much joy. That was the most important thing, of course.
And the gratitude always stayed with us in our marriage, in our long-lasting marriage. We were thankful that my husband came home.
More than 250,000 men did not return. Their bones still lie at Stalingrad, mingled with the remains of 500,000 Red Army soldiers. Today, many remain unburied, on the greatest battlefield of the Second World War.
That was the worst. I couldn't bury him. I could not stand beside his grave. To this day, I cannot live with that. Sometimes I don't even know whether he's dead or alive.